Welcome again. Today we consider topic 7, environmental value systems, as we look at 7.1.1. State what is meant by an environmental value system. 7.1.2. Outline the range of environmental philosophies with reference to Oriodin 1981. 7.13. Discuss how these philosophies influence the decision-making process with respect to environmental issues covered in this course. And 7.1.6, with a personal touch for you to justify your personal viewpoint on environmental issues. Flashback to topic 1, systems and models. A system is an assemblage of parts and the relationship between these parts, with all the parts working together to constitute an entity or a whole. Systems, however, are not confined to the natural sciences. In the social sciences, we can also have systems. And in that sense, we have the environmental value system. This is a particular worldview or a set of paradigms that shapes the way an individual or group of people perceive and evaluate environmental issues. It's influenced by culture, religion, economic, and the socio-political context. This value system is very much a system like this one here, in that it has inputs, but the inputs in this case are from areas like education, cultural influences, religious doctrine, the media, and the output is the decision or the perspective adopted by the particular individual. A model of an environmental value system with the individual in the center, representing the processing and the inputs coming from various sources. To name just 3, we've got education, religion, and society. And the individual then processes all of that information. And the output is the perspective taken by the individual. The question is, do people take one perspective with consistency, or do our perspectives change depending upon the environmental issues at hand? And can everybody's perspective be put into one of these 3 groups? These are some of the questions that we are about to answer.
What happens when we die? Do we just decay and go up in flames and become part of the carbon cycle? Should we grieve for the passing of a loved one? Should we feel sad when people die in natural disasters? Are humans the only species capable of asking these questions? Do all people ask these questions? When you see a whale, a gorilla, or a dolphin, do you see an animal, or do you see a handsome whale, a bad gorilla, or a smart dolphin? While scientists have devoted much time to understanding other species and their behavior, it is true to say that we know much more about our own species than any other. What makes us different from the rest of nature? Is it because we are intelligent and made in the likeness of a divine supernatural entity or God? Is it because we've subdued our environment and manipulated it to our advantage in a way that no other species can? Is it because we've built modern cities and established law and order in them? Is it because we are civilized? Reflect for a moment on a colony of bees or ants. Compare the size of an anthill to a single ant. Do some ants commit crimes against other ants? Do ants manipulate their environment in their best interest? Do they travel by air and by sea and over land in a calculated and organized way. Do humans have the ability to destroy all life on Earth? Humankind is undoubtedly a most powerful force on this 4.5 billion-year-old sphere known to us as Earth. Eminent environmental sociologist Timothy O'Riordan identifies three broad categories in a spectrum of environmental worldviews: the egocentric, the anthropocentric, and the technocentric. Does any of this really matter? Assuming it does, can we place individuals in specific categories and place labels on their environmental point of view? If we were to assume that all life on Earth evolved from pre-existing life, then humans are part of this process, and so are ants. Over the course of millennia, both species have developed complex societies and created massive monuments. Both have triumphed in the struggle for existence. If humans are highly intelligent and they drill for oil and gas and mine for diamonds and create weapons of mass destruction, is this not the work of nature and the forces of evolution? Despite all of our conquests, we are still at Mother Nature's mercy. All it takes is for a tiny, insignificant entity, like a virus, to extinguish our existence and rid the Earth of the burdens of man's bulky ecological footprint. James Lovelock proposed the Gaia hypothesis in the 1970s, and recently he suggested that the planet's built-in regulatory mechanism is being pushed to its limits and man is approaching the brink. So what if the air is foul and there are floods and hurricanes and drought and famine? Who put us in charge of this world, and why should we bother? Our actions in subduing nature were regulated by nature itself through natural selection, and the idea that we've subdued the very force that drove the existence of our species is indicative of man's egocentricity. I submit that any ideas of humans as custodians or stewards of the earth is utterly species-centered and are tantamount to a wealthy man thinking he can rule the world. Our species has done well in the cosmic heartbeat that we've existed here. In light of this success, many have become blind to the fact that all of our actions are still part of nature. When we hunt another species to extinction, that is part of nature. And when we protect a species, that too is nature. When we manipulate DNA and use DDT, that also is nature. Some people will tie themselves to trees and go on hunger strikes to save nature. Others will pour toxic waste into rivers. Yet all of this is part of nature. I question the meaning of the word artificial. Plastics, PCBs, and dioxins are all part of nature and the activity of the living organism called Earth. Do you believe that man's brief moment in time gives him control of the earth? I do not dispute that man's actions are having impacts on the planet, but if we see our Mother Earth as a 4.5 billion-year-old being with a life expectancy of 10 billion years, and for simplicity, we squeeze that time into a 100-year lifetime, then our current environmental crisis is tantamount to a heart murmur on a hot day in the life of a 45-year-old.
What you just heard was my personal environmental perspective. Obviously, it was influenced by several sources. By my education, the books that I read at school, the people who lectured to me, the things that I picked up from documentaries in the media, my influences from religion and from other people in society. And over my lifetime, I have been reflecting on several of these issues and formulating my own personal perspective on the environment. When an environmental issue confronts me, I make a decision on how to act or what position to adopt based on this perspective. O'Riordan 1981 proposed a spectrum of environmental worldviews, with the egocentric on one extreme and the technocentric on the other extreme. The midpoint on that spectrum is the anthropocentric. And because it's a spectrum, there are certain subdivisions along the way as well, with the far egocentric being referred to as the deep ecologist, and the far technocentric being referred to as the cornucopian, with environmental managers and soft ecologists, as they're called, occupying the mid-ground in this spectrum of worldviews. Cornucopians see the world as bounty, full of resources, there for humans to exploit. At the same time, it's not that they conform to the destruction of the environment, but they have confidence that modern technology can bring solutions to whatever environmental issues we face, and that the earth is there for humans to utilize to the maximum. The term cornucopia comes from this symbol, which is a goat's horn full with a great bounty of fruit, showing that the earth is full of resources there for humans to exploit. The problems that go along with this exploitation, the cornucopians believe, will be solved by human ingenuity. Anthropocentrism seeks a balance between development and environmental protection, and the definition of sustainable development put forth by the United Nations in the Brundtland Report of 1987 epitomizes the anthropocentric perspective. Sustainable development being development to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Finally, on the opposite end of the spectrum is the deep ecologist, the tree huggers, as they're sometimes called, people who believe in the preservation of the natural environment, not necessarily for the sake of future generations or for human beings to enjoy or to support humanity, but for its own sake, believing that species have their own rights to planet Earth. Why should we understand environmental philosophies? People do have different views on the environment, but why should we bother to study these views and understand them better? One good answer to that question can be found at the scoping meeting for an environmental impact assessment. Let's take a quick flashback to lesson 2.7.3. At the scoping meeting for an environmental impact assessment, you might recall that several stakeholders come together to express concerns about proposals to make developments. So our railway, if it does proceed, would only happen after an environmental impact assessment is complete. And for this assessment to be complete, it is necessary to bring together the various stakeholders. And for this participatory process to work efficiently, it is necessary for the environmental manager to find common ground among the various points of view. And for him to find this common ground, it is necessary to have some appreciation for what constitutes an ecocentric, what constitutes a technocentric, and what constitutes an anthropocentric, and to realize there is one common goal, which is the preservation of the environment. And Even if an individual subscribes to the technocentric perspective, it's important to realize that such an individual is not necessarily anti-environment. It's just that they believe environmental protection would arise through human ingenuity and technology. And if someone takes the egocentric perspective, it does not mean that he would be against the spirit of compromise. It's important to understand each perspective and to realize that there is common ground regardless of how different each perspective may seem, with the environment and its protection being something that no group opposes, but the way that they believe that protection should come is different. The priorities are different, but there is common ground, and this is a very good reason for understanding the various environmental points of view. A few more questions that illustrate this idea. If you accept that human activity or anthropogenic causes have brought about global warming and sea level rise, what solution do you favor? Alternative energy? That all human beings should live like the indigenous tribes of Amazonia? Or control of human population? Would you be willing to pay more for clean energy, like the energy supplied by these solar panels? Do you believe that mankind should have never used fossil fuels and you have no faith in technology? Do you want the cheapest energy? Do you believe that we should protect endangered species? What are your reasons? Do you believe that we should preserve nature for the benefit of future generations? Do you believe that nature should be preserved for its own sake? Just a few days ago, according to this CNN article, heavily armed poachers killed 40 endangered forest elephants for their ivory in 2 national parks in the Cameroon. The dead elephants were found closely clustered, suggesting the use of modern weapons. What environmental philosophy justifies poaching? Is it technocentric? Is it ecocentric? Is it anthropocentric? Or maybe it's none of the above, a philosophy grounded in the self. And egocentric is concerned solely with personal gain. The perspective put forth by O'Riordan in the diagram does not consider the selfish egocentric who destroys the environment. What are your views on all of these issues raised in today's lesson? Justify your position to a classmate.